So welcome all to this demo theater. So hope you guys are having a good conference. So how many, just a general sense to understand how many folks who actually know Data Reviewer. So how many of you, can you get a show of hands to say how many of you know Data Reviewer, are using Data Reviewer right now? That's a pretty good number, yeah, that's good. So yeah, I just have a simple one slide deck, one slide to actually talk about in general what is Data Reviewer, and then I'll dive deeper into the attribute rules and ready-to-use rules that we have released at 2.3 and 10.7 workflow. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is actually ArcGIS Data Reviewer, what are the general workflows and tools we have there, and the different platform pieces that we have in the system. And then to talk about attribute rules, general overview of all the different types of attribute rules. Then we dive deeper into ready-to-use rules and what is ready-to-use rules are in the context of attribute rules. And then we'll talk a little bit more about, we'll demonstrate how to create and author a ready-to-use rule. And then we'll talk about what are the supported checks at 2.3, 10.7 timeline, the one that's going to be released. Or released as part of ArcGIS Pro, and then what's coming later. And then we'll go through a simple edit workflow in ArcGIS Pro to see how the constrained workflows that we set up actually help us actually through the process of data integrity. And then I'll provide some resources as well as what's coming in the next release actually. So what is Data Reviewer? Data Reviewer is a data quality management system for the ArcGIS platform. So we provide a rule-based workflows, both automated as well as interactive tools to actually visually review your data as well as in an automated fashion review your data. So this helps in the process of the quality control lifecycle, wherein you can actually get input data and then you validate them and ensure that the data is good to go before you actually do map production or do any other applications based on that. So it also helps you track and report errors and the error information and be able to go through the fixing those issues as we go and understand the quality of data at any point in time. So what are the different pieces you have of Data Reviewer inside the ArcGIS platform? We have a server extension as part of the Data Reviewer server. It's existed since 10.1. We also have the desktop extension, both in ArcMap as well as in ArcGIS Pro, which provides the old batch job-based rules as well as map-based rules. So at Pro 2.3, we're introducing the rules that are going to be persisted as part of the attribute rules in the geodatabase. Then we have some JavaScript APIs as well as the SDK API in ArcGIS Pro to support using some of those workflows in an SDK workflow. For non-developers, we also have the web app builder widgets, which actually allow you to configure a few widgets across. We're using the Data Reviewer server as the service offering, so that you can actually dashboard information as well as report or identify features that are problematic in your data. So in general, what is attribute rules? I think there was a presentation yesterday as well. So attribute rules is something that's existed since 2.1. And one of the key things is it's defined as it's a user-defined rule that is going to be defined for simple features using arcade scripts. They ensure data quality at the point of data collection as well as data maintenance, essentially being able to, when you collect data or enter data into the system, as well as maintain the data going forward. And they enforce data integrity as they allow you to stop bad data getting into the system. They are defined or stored in feature classes or tables and are persisted in a geodatabase. And they are supported across the platform. What that means is you configure those rules on your feature class, and then you basically expose them as part of the feature class as a feature layer that can be used by your online application, your web application, or your mobile applications. And all those things will ingest the same data because the rules are created at the point of the data itself. So what are the different types of attribute rules? There is 4 different types of attribute rules. Primarily there is validation, calculation rules, which allow you to calculate or auto-populate values. which can be further divided into two different things, that one that can immediately run during an edit process, the other one which will actually take place after you input your data and then calculate it later. Finally, the last part that I think we'll delve more into it today is the constraint workflow, where you can actually stop bad data entering into the system. From a validation perspective, validation rules are rules that can be created using, created at the geodatabase, but executed as part of a validation service, which is a server object extension. And then you can it creates errors in the error tables, and you can look at them just like what you used to do with reviewer rules, where you can actually run those validation rules and then actually return a bunch of errors and look at those errors and fix them. It evaluates only dirty features, which actually means it understands, since the rules are configured in the source understands when the last edit was made to the feature classes or tables. So when you re-evaluate the same rules against the data, it evaluates what part of the data is actually changed and runs only on those features. So then again, since it's a validation, it's a service workflow, it's kind of, you do it after the creation of the features, not at the point of creation of features. So calculation rules allow you to auto-populate values into a table. They are applied to generally fields or a bunch of fields in the data set. Within those calculation rules, you can define various orders, so you can calculate a bunch of fields or a field based on multiple criteria. And then, as I said, there is an immediate calculation rule which basically runs during the edit process, and then there is the batch calculation which runs using the same validation service. The thing that we're going to use as part of ready-to-use rules is the constraint workflow. In this case, it actually evaluates during the edit operation while you enter or where you make those edits. It could be an insert feature or an update feature. Then it can be configured to have user-defined error messages and error numbers and things like that. And then edits will be rolled back if those violate your constraint. So if you define a constraint rule saying certain features should not intersect certain features, if you try to edit the feature and if you do violate that rule, it will not allow you to push that commit into the system. So what is ready-to-use rules? Essentially, it's a version of data reviewer checks that are available as part of the attribute rules workflow. So currently at 2.3, we are only part of the constraint type workflow. So they are easily configurable attribute rules. Essentially, the data reviewer rules are focused checks specific to a certain criteria, and those checks are already configured are they just configured? They're not scripted. So you already have the scripts behind them. So essentially, it's a templated script defined for a check. So you basically go into the user interface, configure the rule. We'll see that in the demonstration. So, and then you only define the parameters that impact your rule, and then it automatically uses the templated arcade script. And then it allows, of course, it assesses the features' integrity and geometric properties, as well as evaluates spatial relationships across features. So as I said, ready-to-use rules at 2.3 for reviewer are supported only as part of the constraint workflow. So they are triggered during feature edit process, which could be an insert, creation, update, or a deletion. It's important to note, sometimes when you create a cross-layer rule, a rule that says this feature should not intersect this feature, the rule is established against a feature class that you want to establish it against. But then the additional layer that you could be deleting that feature or could be deleting the other feature. So anytime you delete any feature, if there is need to be intersection between those features, that rule could fail the data. The data could fail basically because of that rule. So you need to ensure that, and these triggers are very powerful. Depending upon how you configure them, it can impact you adversely also. So you don't want to actually say configure a rule against your Z or M based values and during the edit process, unless and until you have a way to define a constant Z value or a constant M value, because there are multiple steps in that edit process, and it will fail the first step if you configure a rule on the insert or an update. So you need to ensure that you do the right things when you use the triggers. And finally, since they are configured against a feature class or a table, you can then export them out as part of a CSV file, like Excel file, and then you can take them and import it into another feature class or a table in another workspace if you want to. So let's just quickly switch over how to go about managing that in ArcGIS Pro. So here I have a map of Naperville, city of Naperville. This is address data. I have some address points and I have some parcels and building footprints here. I also have the road center lines. So what I'm going to do is I already have established some rules. So if I open road center lines, attribute rules, I can see the attribute rules view, which contains a couple of rules already. So as you see, there is a lot of things here. So attribute rules comes with a lot of different types of rules, as I said earlier. So you have the calculation rule, constraint rules, validation, and then the ready to use rules. So right now we play into the constraint workflow alone. So you'll see those set of rules that are currently supported. So let's go ahead and configure a rule. We'll configure a feature on feature rule. So I'm going to configure this feature on feature rule against this. So I'm going to define a condition, a rule which says this road center lines should not intersect a building footprint. So if it intersects a building footprint, I want to identify that as a problem and not allow people to enter incorrect data into the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to configure it against a building footprint. Then I'm going to use the intersects relationship, and anytime it is within 2 meters of the road, you want to mark them as an error. So if the road center line intersects within 2 meters of a building, then you want to mark them as an error. Then we can define at what points you want to trigger this rule. You can do that at insert update, and then since it's a cross layer rule, I would actually go ahead and establish another rule against the building footprint, very similar to the one that I configure against road center line. So building footprints intersects road center lines, and then ensure that runs on delete. So if you delete any of those features in either ways, if they do intersect or if they are crossing, then you want to identify them as a problem. At this point, I'm not going to do that. So I'm going to give a brief description to that, a name and a description. And then I'll provide some tags to it. Tags will help search those rules from the metadata information. So I go ahead and save this rule. So there is a problem right now. So basically it says it can't access the rules. So what I've also done is I've also established this as a service workflow. So let me go ahead and stop the service. So what I'm trying to say is, like, since the rules are configured against the feature class, if they are exposed as a service, you want to ensure that you want to configure the rules right and then go ahead and publish them as a service. And if you do have it as a service, you need to stop them and then try to persist those rules. So now that the rule is persisted as part of the geodatabase, so now what we'll do is, like, as part of this, right, I've also configured another rule. Let me go ahead and open the rule here. So I have a rule on the waterline features. So I have waterline features in my system. So they basically, I want to ensure some rules associated to this waterline. So they are waterlines, they have Z and M values associated to them. So whenever I sketch a water feature, I need to ensure that I have valid Z values in it. So the way I do that is, I go ahead and configure a rule says, identify all my non-monotonic water features. What that means is, anytime I'm seeing a Z value that is not monotonic. So a river cannot flow without a change in Z elevation. It has a change in Z elevation at different vertices. So in order to do that, I basically establish a rule saying, hey, I want to find all the things that have the constant Z values or an incorrect Z value, or water cannot flow in the opposite direction clearly. So those kind of things can be tracked. You can also identify if you want only a decreasing sense or an increasing sense, and that's typically used in scenarios like roads linear referencing workflows, where you want to define your measure values. Like, for example, milestones. It can only go increasing. It cannot be it cannot, or decreasing or increasing in certain direction. It cannot have random values. So things like that can be configured with this check. So we configured a couple of checks. Let's go back and switch to the slides and see what are the supported checks for this 2.3, and then let's talk about it a little bit before we come back and do an edit workflow. So what we basically saw before we get on with this is essentially an attribute rules view, which is available as part of the system, and then you used a ready to use button which has a gallery of checks. Those gallery will keep increasing based on how many ever checks we bring into the system. At 2.3, that's the list of checks we have, and that's based off different types of geometries you have. It actually filters those inputs. So these are the supported list of checks. We have checks that check for features integrity, which is cutbacks and duplicate vertices check. We also have the checks that check for spatial relationship. We talked about feature on feature. We also saw what is monotonicity. And then we also have something called polyline or path close on self. So you don't want to have loop features, and you want to find them, and you can identify them using the polyline or path close on self. We also have geometry evaluation properties, like I don't want a multi-part polygon or a polyline in my data model. You can do that by using the evaluate part count. Whenever you have a part count greater than 1, you want to find them as issues. Similarly, you have a bunch of other evaluation checks like polyline length. So if you have a data model specification to not have features more than a certain length, you can identify them as part of this. There's also the checks like polygon perimeter and vertex count, which allows you to determine you cannot have too many vertices in a polygon within a set area, or you cannot have too many greater than a certain area or between a certain area, things like that. You can define those kind of evaluations here. So let's just switch back to the demo. For now that we had configured the rules in the last demonstration, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and say we'll go ahead and edit it both in using the actual feature classes, as well as edit those as part of the pro workflow using feature services. So let me go ahead and turn it to another bookmark area. So here you have a bunch of features. I have road center lines. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and configure this road center line, so I can see that I can modify a bunch of features here. So I can select this feature. Okay.
Just to be clear, for these immediate rules to come into play, you have to be editing against a feature service.
Not really. You can be editing against a feature class or a feature service. For the batch calculation or for those validation rules, which we don't have as part of reviewer at this point, but for those general rules that you can do at 2.3, you need a service execution. For the immediate ones, you don't need a service.
So you can do this against a direct test.
Yes. So let me see if I can edit this feature. It's weird. For some reason I could not. Yeah, I did. Yeah, let's see. That's weird. Well, we can't. Yeah, that's weird. So let's look at if we can edit this feature. Yeah, we have a web feature here, right? So let's go ahead and edit this. Sorry, I was not able to answer your question on editing feature services, but then yeah, that's just a minor issue that I have in the demonstration, but I think you should be able to edit both feature classes as well as feature service. So let me go ahead and edit this feature service. This is a published feature service of that same data, and I have the same rules established. So if I go into the road center lines, you should see the same rule that we established here. So let me go ahead and modify the feature. As you see, there is this feature which has issues. So if I move this feature, it will be okay. So if I just update it like this, so my rule was, the original state of this feature was like this. So if I had updated it like that, it would have reported me a problem saying whatever we established at that point, which says building footprints should not intersect the road center lines. So in order to fix that, I'll go ahead and, as an editor, when I come in, since I have this rule established, I don't make those issues, I don't create issues or create bad data. So instead, I'll fix it correctly. So now when I do it right, it allows me to create those features. Otherwise, it'll stop me from entering that bad data into the system. So I can also go ahead and try creating more features and see if that actually. Let me get to the step here. So I have a feature here that's not connected. Let me go ahead and connect it. Yeah, it's not snapping. I'm trying to see if I can create an error. So what I was trying to establish was, like, I had vertices very close to each other. They became coincident here. I mean, those vertices were made to one. But if I had vertices that were very close, I had a rule in the system which says duplicate vertices are too close to road features. So I wanted to actually see if I could reproduce it, but it's a pretty low level 1 meter distance. So the idea here is, reviewer traditionally has always validated data after the data has been entered into the system. This is a scenario where the data is getting validated as it's actually going into the system. The one thing that we wanted to ensure is users get the same user experience as our existing reviewer checks, where people configure a bunch of rules and then against the data based on certain criteria, and then they get actually evaluated at the process of data creation or modification. So that's kind of what I wanted to show as part of this demonstration. So just a quick summary. Data Reviewer is now used, I mean, as part of the ready-to-use rules. Now you're actually ensuring that the data doesn't enter the system with bad rules, with issues with the system, with issues with the data itself. The one thing that we showed today was the constrained workflow alone as part of Data Reviewer. I think at the coming release, the next release, we are planning to have rules as part of the validation service as well. So which will be service-only workflow at that point, but there'll also be error management and managing errors and managing their error lifecycle as part of that workflow. So some resources for folks to take away: the product page is available at esri.com Data Reviewer. So ArcGIS Pro has more content and help for attribute rules as well as for ready-to-use rules and the different types of rules that we have in the ecosystem today as part of Reviewer. We have a map-based rules, we have the attribute rules, we also have rules that are established as part of ArcMap as batch jobs that can be also run in ArcGIS Pro. So as we know, we have the GeoNet forum where you can actually always post questions and feedback based on how we use the software, and let us know, and we can improvise on those things. Yeah, this is the first time we are offering this session. We have more I think we will have more content in the next offering of this, wherein we'll have more validation rules and we'll have more checks coming as part of the ready-to-use workflow. So please take a moment to actually provide some feedback for the session so we can improvise and do better. Have any questions? Yeah.
I realize that this is still pretty new, but are there any good guidelines or rules of thumb performance-wise in terms of when are you overloading on rules?
So, and that's something that we have a very close watch on. So that's the reason why we have these scripts and very specific checks that are supported as part of the immediate edit workflow. When we implement these checks, we are trying to ensure that it's performant, even if it's run through Arcade, versus if it's run the traditional way that we have run in our data reviewer workflow. So what we will ensure is anytime we bring in a check as an immediate workflow, we will ensure that actually is performant enough to actually do that work. And we don't want to have users run, when they make an edit, wait for like forever to actually make the edit happen. So we don't want people to write. That's one of the reasons why we are managing the script behind that, and we actually update the script and we optimize it as Arcade evolves as it goes. So we also plan to not just do Arcade-based evaluation as part of the validation rules. We plan to do the traditional evaluation as well, wherein we'll take into consideration caching and performance of the rules correctly.
I think what he's asking though, is there a limit? Like you don't want to set so many, otherwise it has to churn through a ton of rules, a ton of slow.
It's kind of hard to actually define that. When you define the rule, you define it against a feature class. So that's where we are taking a step ahead of that. When we say this can be run as an immediate calculation rule, we actually do the homework on trying to find out whether it's actually doesn't make sense to be run as an immediate calculation rule. We just do not throw all the checks that we have as an immediate calculation rule. Certain checks should be done post creation is kind of what we think.
Does this replace validation or topology?
No, it doesn't. Topology and this exist both. Can you repeat the? Oh, sorry.
Because they can't hear what we're asking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I mean, the question was, does it replace topology? No, it doesn't. Topology, you still need topology for a set of data sets. You want to establish a relationship between these data sets and do things. This is more of an offering where you can actually configure ad hoc rules against simple features. So you're not really using a topology workflow. You can still establish topology. Like in Data Reviewer, we have a workflow where we establish a Data Reviewer topology check, which actually allows you to import topology errors into the system as well. So this eventually will become a common ecosystem because the way we manage errors as part of the validation rules are essentially the same user interface for topology as well. So it doesn't. It's not. These can coexist totally. Yeah.
Sorry, did you mention that this is not for ArcGIS server? For doing an ArcGIS server?
These rules can be, so basically they are platform agnostic rules. So essentially you configure the rules at the feature class level, but when you expose them as feature service and you apply edits at the server level, it will still apply the same rules.
Okay, so if I have portal feature service and then I apply the rules to that, then it will actually, like if I want to calculate an attribute, it will actually do that in portal.
Yes, it would.
What version of portal?
10.7, 10.7 it should be able to do that. Yeah.
Just can't take it offline.
Not yet. That's coming soon actually, I guess. Sorry, I didn't. Yes, these checks should be able to, you should be able to configure them against Parcel Fabric dataset as well, yes.
What's more efficient, the attribute rules, data reviewer, or say a Python script?
It depends what you're doing. It depends on automation workflows versus manual workflows versus service workflows. Python is something that you establish and you have to write it. It's after the fact. You don't do it during the edit process. This allows you to do things happen, but you configure it at a source and then you can expose it across all the different platforms automatically. Yeah, I think I need to take off, folks. We'll take the questions offline. Thank you very much.